What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the Week 8 UFL Breakdown. I'm here with Millionaire Maker winner, one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Timberwolves just won in 5 games last night against Golden State. I was at that game as we were just discussing. So happy about that. Happy to talk UFL.
Yeah, very excited to talk UFL. Neil, we were so close to a miracle first and second place finish. Unfortunately, we had to settle for second and third place last week. I won't get into the some of the tilt of the Wes Hills injury or the Houston Roughnecks defensive touchdown, but it was a really fun week last week. I had a lot of really good teams, and I know Neil had at least one really good team that ended up finishing top 3. Really great to see like some of these scores come in higher, a lot more offense. I think, I tweeted this out, but like guys like Jalen McClendon and Bryce Perkins getting every single snap for their respective teams, I think has done a lot for the quality of football these last few weeks. And if you are, betting these player props, you're playing UFL DFS, I really think you're going to want to subscribe to either Fantasy Points UFL package or Fantasy Points All-In package, which includes UFL, college football, NFL, and the Fantasy Points data suite. Here's what you get in just our UFL product, though. Projections for every player in every game, main slate DFS ownership projections, a weekly written breakdown of the DFS slate that is already live on the site right now, access to our paywall Discord where I provide any notes on coach speak, insider info, and breakdowns of single game showdown and Sunday only DFS slates. You also get our official picks for player props. And so far this year, we've gone 35 and 25 plus 4.6 units or a plus 24% ROI. We were so close to the clean sweep last week. Unfortunately, Day Hunter went over his rushing prop and then ran for -2 yards and went under, but still a solid 6-1 week for us on props in week 7. That whole package is only $70 for the rest of the season. And if you're interested in stepping it up to the all-in package, which, like I said, includes UFL, college football, NFL, and the data suite, you can save 20% with promo code ALLUFL. Again, that is ALLUFL to save 20% on the Fantasy Points All-In package. Neil, before we get into these games, I think we need to talk about the biggest storyline of the week in the UFL. An article came out, I believe, on ESPN today that said Caleb Williams explored all options to avoid playing for the Chicago Bears. This pains me a little bit. I grew up a Bears fan, so it was a little sad to read. But apparently, one of the things he considered was signing with a UFL team. Now, we already talked about this pre-show. I'm sure this would have just been, a signing really in name only to, avoid the draft or avoid getting drafted number 1 overall by the Bears. I seriously doubt he would have played regardless of what team he signed with. I mean, there's no sense in risking your health for that. But Neil, hypothetically, if Caleb Williams did sign in the NFL and was going to play, what team would you want him to play for? And how many fantasy points per game would this guy average?
I would obviously want him on the San Antonio Brahmas. I think that goes without saying. I think he would average 34 fantasy points per game.
Ooh, okay. That I had like 28 to 30 in
yours
my head.
Is more accurate, I think, because
I
forget these games move so quickly, and it's pretty tough to average 34. And he runs some, but he's not like elite. So I think yours is probably a more accurate prediction.
The one thing that I think would really benefit Caleb Williams in the UFL compared to the NFL is obviously he's a guy that loves to play out of structure, and that's really hard to do in the NFL because these defensive linemen are just ridiculously fast. In the UFL, these edge defenders are way slower, and we've seen guys like, Manny Wilkins, Bryce Perkins have a ton of success outside of structure, and that would be like the really exciting thing about Caleb Williams. It would kind of be a throwback to his college days at USC. I mean, he had dropbacks in college that lasted 8 or 10 seconds because he was just dancing around back there. I think that'd be really fun to see in the UFL. Personally, I definitely like to see him with the San Antonio Brahmas. Obviously, the AJ Smith version, I think the current version runs a bit too much of a pro style system for me to be super excited about Caleb Williams there. I'd also like him in Michigan or Birmingham. I think he'd have a decent amount of success there. And those are obviously talented teams. So
yeah, I mean, if it weren't for my fandom, I would want him on a better offense, just a more fun offense style, just because I want to cheer for the Brahmas. I would want him there.
I mean, if he was on the 2024 Brahmas, that would be like so sick. That would be such a fun offense. All right, with that out of the way, just had to discuss that really quick. We can talk about these games. Slate kicks off with a rough one, Neil. Memphis Showboats at the San Antonio Brahmas. Total here, it's only 36.5. Memphis is a 1.5 point underdog here. Do you like any bets on this game? I don't think I do. I feel pretty neutral about this spread.
Yeah, I do also. I think
Okay.
I kind of want to take the over here, but that might just be because it's fun to take the over. But like the offenses are getting better. Kevin Hogan has looked passable. We got Day Hunter on the Memphis side, or sorry, Daywood Davis. I cannot get those names right. Daywood Davis coming back from Memphis maybe helps the offense a little bit. So yeah, I think, and the defenses are the worst in the NFL, in the UFL possibly. So I think I like the over a little bit.
Yeah, I could definitely see the over. I mean, the San Antonio defense has just been a total disaster. Let's talk injuries, and then we can talk the Memphis side of this game. Wes Hill's unfortunately out. He suffered a calf injury last week. Kwame Lassiter, though, is back in the starting lineup for Memphis. On the San Antonio side, Greg Ward, Matthew Sexton, and Anthony McFarland are all out. Rashawn Henry, who I was really excited about a couple weeks ago and only ended up scoring about 2 fantasy points over the last 2 games, he is inactive. Jacob Harris is back in the lineup for the San Antonio Brahmas, although he is listed as a backup. We will talk a little bit more about that shortly. Neil, on the Memphis side here, Troy Williams is going to be the starting quarterback. I have a quote from Jim Turner's midweek media availability. This was on May 13th, where he talked about the quarterback situation. I think this is really important just for sort of this overarching analysis here. So when he was asked about, the quarterback room and sort of what he was thinking going forward, Jim Turner said, between the 3 of them, we'd like to get them all snaps. We're still trying to figure that out. But between the 3 quarterbacks, we are still trying to get everybody snaps. In the last 3 games, don't be shocked if somebody else ends up playing or if one of the 3 of them ends up playing a half. I'm not sure what we end up doing, but I look forward to watching all 3 of them play. Post game, he also sort of expressed dismay last week at how Troy Williams and EJ Perry had been treated. I'm trying not to read into it too much, but the impression that I get is that Jim Turner is really upset with how Ken Wisenhunt handled the quarterback situation in training camp early in the season. And I think he's also really upset at how Ken Wisenhunt just ended up leaving the team. I really don't think Turner, like if you got him in a private room, got a couple beers in him, I think he would really be upset at Ken Wisenhunt, would really just, eviscerate that guy verbally. That said, Neil, I don't think we can play Troy Williams this week. I only have a 9-point projection on Williams. I actually ended up projecting it out. Williams is the starter. EJ Perry is listed as the backup. Dresser Wynn is actually QB3. And I believe I mentioned this on a show a couple weeks ago, but after the league ratified the new collective bargaining agreement, the quarterback 3 is no longer an emergency quarterback. They're an active roster player. So they can be subbed in regardless of, the injury situation going on with the other 2 quarterbacks. So the way I projected this was about 50% of dropbacks for Troy Williams, another 30% for EJ Perry, and then 20% for Dresser Wynn. What do you think about this quarterback situation? Do you have any interest in dipping your toes in here? Unfortunately, Friday night game, no showdown slate, no 2-game slate for this one. So it's just a standalone as a part of the 4-game slate. What are your thoughts before we talk skill players?
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you. You'd love to play a quarterback against the Brahmas, but I don't see how you can do it. I think the upside is just not there. Even if one of them takes hold of the job, it's like, okay, a bad quarterback, a great spot, but just the likelihood of that happening. We've got a 1,100 person field, just not necessary.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And there are, plenty of pretty strong quarterback options. Also some relatively compelling single digit, 10% owned kind of quarterback options as well. So yeah, I really don't think you need to go that direction. Let's talk pass catchers here. I pointed this out in the past, but this is still a team that's running a ton of 10 personnel, 4 wide receiver sets. So we effectively have 4 starting wide receivers in this offense. Just looking at some of these route shares last week, Daywood Davis stepped in his first game active at an 87% route share. Jonathan Adams was at 79%, Elijah Stove at 71%, and Kai Loxley at 69%. Now, of course, that was without Kwame Lassiter, who is listed as a starter ahead of Eli Stove. Daywood Davis actually also listed as a backup. My thought here, and I believe I mentioned this to you pre-show, Neil, I think Daywood Davis, Jonathan Adams, Kai Loxley, and Kwame Lassiter will get the vast majority of wide receiver routes here. And I also have fairly good confidence that Daywood Davis and Jonathan Adams will earn the most targets. We just know who these players are. We know they're target earners. Any of those guys that you like in particular, would you be willing to maybe throw a bone to a guy like Eli Stove, who could eat into Loxley's, outside route share a little bit? I don't think I'd go that direction. What do you think?
I don't think I would go down that far. I guess Kyle Loxley's 3,100. This is if we were making late swaps, maybe, but because it's the Friday night game,
Yeah.
I don't think I get to an Eli Stove. I do think, Kwame Lassiter at 5,300, he's been pretty involved when he's been out there. Now, obviously, with Daywood out there, that's probably going to cut into his role a bit. But I think at 5,300, he's playable. I think 5% ownership seems pretty reasonable on Kwame Lassiter. So I don't hate the idea of going there, especially in great matchup with the Brahmas. So I think I'll actually come in overweight to 5% Kwame Lassiter. I do actually, and again, I hate that this is the Friday night game because I would love it as a late swap option, but I think I'm going to play some Daywood Davis, just take some shots on the talent there. We have him projected for virtually zero ownership. I think that, the ownership is going to be, I would be pretty surprised if Daywood Davis actually comes in sub 5%. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe 5% that's about where I'd expect him to come in, because we've had people, you can see people in the Discord talking about, oh, I can't wait to play Daywood Davis next week. So I think, sorry to call that person out. But well, I'm the same way. I agree. Like we all kind of have the same thought of like, yeah, he didn't do anything last week, but he was running all the routes. Now he gets the ideal matchup. He's a second game back, maybe a little bit more likely to be involved. So yeah, I'm going to be playing some Daywood Davis. Maybe I'll play 10%. Like I don't want to, maybe more. I don't know. I don't want to give him too many lineups because I think this offense might just be kind of broken with the quarterback, 3 different quarterbacks. Just that's not good for an offense, I don't think. But I think probably playing 10% of Daywood Davis makes sense to me. I think Jonathan Adams is actually kind of a tough click for me just because of the price tag. He's the most expensive wide receiver on the slate. Getting the most ownership of the 3. I'm sure I'll have some shares because of the matchup. If it was a worse matchup, I might just not play any Jonathan Adams. I think because they're playing the Brahmas, I'll probably get to around where the field is, around 6%. But yeah, I think my favorite is probably Kwame Lassiter because of the price tag, then followed by Daywood Davis just because of the lack of ownership, and then Jonathan Adams at that price tag. I'm going to play some, but I'm not super enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty similar to you. I might like Loxley just a little bit more. It was interesting to me last week. Elijah Stove was mostly playing in the slot. Loxley was primarily playing outside. So, I think it's possible Stove and Loxley sort of rotate. The only other active wide receiver is Isaiah Henney, who's just not going to play much on offense at all. I think it's possible Stove and Loxley rotate. I also think it's possible that role just largely belongs to Loxley. So I don't mind him as like a 3,100 salary saving option. And I'm with you there. I think our projected ownership right now, we've got 0.3% on Daywood Davis. I'm probably going to bump that to 3.5% or 4%, something around there. I do think kind of like, a guy like Hakeem Butler, people are just going to be pretty excited to jam in a player that they're familiar with and that they know can put up a big fantasy score, even if it is in a relatively gross game environment. Neil, I think we're back to Bell Cow Deneric Prince. I mean, we can never be too sure about this, especially with a team that's so in flux like Memphis is. But, we've got a very strong projection on Prince. He's projecting for a ton of ownership. I don't really think the week 7, weighted opportunity statistics are particularly relevant. So I'm actually going to backpedal a little bit. I believe it was week 5 when Deneric Prince earned 80% of backfield weighted opportunity. That was the last game with just him and Jalen Jackson. And that was sort of after, right around week 3, week 4, Ken Wisenhunt had stepped down and Jim Turner really committed to just being like, okay, we're going to play the best players. Noel Mazzone finally took over as the offensive coordinator. So my speculation here is that we're going to be back to, say, 75, 80% of backfield usage going to Deneric Prince. Now, Jalen Jackson could still steal some goal line carries. Maybe this is actually closer to like a 60-40 committee, but I feel pretty good about Prince this week. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on Prince. I will say San Antonio's run defense only allowing 88 yards per game over the past 3 weeks. So maybe they've improved somewhat, but they overall on the season have not been a great run defense. You add in the opportunities for Prince. I think, yeah, he makes for a pretty strong play. The one downside there is obviously the ownership. We've got him projected for 35%, one of the chalkiest players on the slate. I might not get there quite to 35% just because I'll mix in some of the others, but I didn't really fall in love with any of the running backs on this slate. So I actually might get to 35% just because there's no. Last week I loved Deion Jackson, which he did fine, and then everybody else crushed him. But this week I'm not really super in love with any of the running backs, so maybe I do get to 35%.
Yeah, I could see myself falling in love a little bit with Saquandre White, but we need to figure out Kirk Merritt's status. We can talk about that a little bit later. Yeah, I think I'm roughly right there with you on Prince overall. I won't be getting to any Jalen Jackson in this one. San Antonio side, Kevin Hogan's been okay. I think fairly passable as a quarterback. And I'm a little intrigued by playing him this week. I mean, it's a really gross game environment, which is a bit of a problem. I also think if San Antonio gets out to a big lead here, that could be tough. But something like Hogan plus Justin Smith or plus Jontre Kirkland, I think that's a fairly compelling low-ish owned stack. I have a really hard time knowing where Hogan's ownership is going to end up. I've got about 7.5 projected right now across the industry. He's projecting fairly well. Where are you at on Hogan this week, and how do you feel about some of his stacking partners here?
I think Hogan is playable. I don't know that I'm going to play a ton of Hogan, just because he's fairly expensive, and we haven't really seen a great game from him yet. But at 9,000, I think he's playable is how I would describe him. I think 7.5% ownership feels about right. We're also, we might only have, I guess we did have Magoo added to the player pool, so we're going to have 7, I think, playable quarterbacks, 7 teams with playable quarterbacks. So yeah, I think it's probably a fair number on. I'm not like super enthusiastic about Hogan, but I think getting just a little bit under 10% is probably a good aim. My guess is that I come in lighter than that and just play more of the other quarterbacks. So I might not play any Kevin Hogan. I wish I could play him on Showdown or something, but I don't know. Maybe I'll have a couple of shares in my lineups and be just slightly under the field. I don't know. What do you think of Hogan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going back and forth on it. I'll submit. I believe it's 35 is the max in the $20. I'll probably have him on 1 to 2 teams. I think the hardest part about Hogan is that outside of Justin Smith, we just can't have a ton of confidence in how they're going to rotate these wide receivers. Justin Smith was listed as a starter, as was D. Anderson. And if you want to walk down Narrative Street, I mean, this is D. Anderson's former team. They just traded him. San Antonio has nothing to play for. Maybe they try to force feed D. Anderson the ball. I don't really buy that. But I do think it's interesting to think about. Jontre Kirkland was listed as a backup last week, and this was a little frustrating for me because he still ended up with a 70% route share and played ahead of Rashawn Henry. Also finished with a 27% target share. This is sort of the Jontre Kirkland that we had grown used to in the previous couple of seasons that we had seen him play. And he is a little bit expensive. This is also just a bad offense. And the Memphis defense isn't great, but they're certainly better than the San Antonio defense. So I think that's the hardest part with Kevin Hogan for me, is that, outside of like a Kevin Hogan, Justin Smith stack, I don't really know if you can confidently double stack him. I think forced to choose, I'd probably go with Jontre Kirkland, but I don't know, Neil, if either of us would be shocked if Jontre ran 40% of routes this week and D. Anderson was out there full time. Not to mention Jacob Harris is back. He's listed as a backup. And we could see what we saw, what was it, in week 6 when they played Birmingham and he ran 2 routes all game. We could also see him kind of pull like a Jontre Kirkland, what he did last week, and run 60 or 70% of routes despite being listed as a backup, just outright playing ahead of D. Anderson. So I think that's the toughest part for Hogan. If we had a better grip on these wide receiver rotations, I'd probably be willing to play 10, 12% Kevin Hogan in this contest. Another problem with this offense, Neil, is that Steven Stylianos and Alize Mack are earning like serious targets now. Stylianos, I believe, is at a 19% target share last week, and over his last 3 games, he is at a 14% target share, 73% route share as well. So Peyton Pardias praised Stylianos. In retrospect, I kind of wish I lowered his projected ownership a little bit before the show, but he does project as a decent value across the board at 3,500. I think the biggest problem, and I pointed this out in my article with a guy like Stylianos and why I don't think I'm going to get to him at all on the main slate, his average depth of target is 2.1. So these targets are basically worthless. And you don't necessarily mind that if they're, if it's a 2.1 ADOT for like a Ja'Cour Pearson, who could turn those plays into 50-yard touchdowns. Stylianos just isn't going to do that. Neil, I'd assume you have no interest in Stylianos. Is it pretty much just Justin Smith for you?
But what did you say the route share is on Stylianos?
73% over the last 3 weeks, and a 14% target share on top of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, he feels like they pass to him way more than I expect them to. I'm always like surprised when I see the name, but yeah, he's gotten to the point where it's like, they seem to be targeting him. I think he's actually I don't think Justin Smith. I wouldn't say just Justin Smith, because I actually think D. Anderson at 4,100 is sort of interesting. I mean, he had
Okay.
one great game already this year. I think Jontre Kirkland to me is the hardest click because he's so expensive, and because they're yanking these guys all over the place. So I actually think, to me, D. Anderson is playable in the largest field tournament
I'd
at
agree with
very
that.
little
Yeah.
ownership. Stylianos playable. I'm not going to play a ton of any of these guys. And then Speedy Stevenson, 70% route share again last week. I'd say playable also. Like he was somewhat involved 2 weeks ago. So I think because of the price tag, like they have just a bevy of these like really value receivers, and probably none of them are going to get there. Like we saw, as I recall, did anybody get there last week? Maybe did Ciliano score a touchdown? I don't remember, but regardless,
I
nobody's
believe him
crushed
and
last
Mac
week.
both scored a touchdown, which really
Okay, yeah,
nuked the upside of some of these other wide receivers.
yeah. So they're cheap enough that like I might have a smattering of Stylianos, Justin Smith, D. Anderson, Speedy Stevenson would probably be where I draw the line. But I'm not jamming any. I don't love any of them. Do you
Yeah.
like any of them?
No, I mean, probably Justin Smith would be my favorite. I'd probably put D. Anderson second and then Kirkland. I don't think I'm going to get to any Stylianos. I just can't play. I mean, I get that he projects as a good value, and there's really not much I can do to change that when, like I said, he's been pretty consistent at around a 15% target share the
Yeah,
last 3 weeks. I just see no upside. Like, I don't think Stylianos can score 20. Maybe if
I
he
don't
scored
either.
multiple touchdowns and got like 8 targets, but I really think that's a very thin sort of path to go after. Neil, this running back room got a little bit grosser this week. Last week we saw a pretty strong workload for Jashaun Corbin, earned 69% of backfield weighted opportunity, put up a monster score, 24.1 DraftKings fantasy points, had that really long breakaway touchdown, also finished the game with 9 rush attempts and 3 total targets, including 4 red zone touches. I'd love to go back to the well on Corbin. The only thing that makes that a little iffy this week is that Jaden Sheridan got cut by the Michigan Panthers because Matthew Colburn is healthy again. Jaden Sheridan was then picked up by the San Antonio Brahmas, and he will be active this week as their RB3. I would mostly expect Sheridan's workload to eat into Corbin. I believe those two players are a little bit more similar than Sheridan and Aiden Robbins, for instance. So, this is kind of tough. I don't necessarily hate like a Jashaun Corbin plus Brahma's defense type of lineup, but it's easy to see, a situation where Corbin maybe only ends up with like 45 to 55% of backfield weighted opportunity. Aiden Robbins maybe steals inside the 5 carries, and then, Sheridan steals a couple targets, a couple carries. That's pretty gross. Where are you at on Corbin this week? He's only projecting for 4% ownership right now.
Yeah. The ownership makes it almost interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. He had the one breakaway. It was like he had been, rushing for 2.5 yards per carry the entire season with no passing game work. Man, that was frustrating for me personally, as somebody who completely faded Jashaun Corbin to see that long breakaway absolutely break the slate. I probably don't get to much Jashaun Corbin. I think it's possible that Sheridan just doesn't really get involved, right? Like that he's
Yeah.
just there as like an emergency, or like I don't know, but probably doesn't get super involved, especially after last week with how well Corbin did end up running. It's possible that Corbin just kind of keeps the role. So I don't totally hate it, but I'm not going to be playing a ton. It's a fine spot with Memphis. I mean, if PFF's run grade, Memphis grades out as the worst run defense in the league, kind of by far. But then they haven't been that atrocious the past few games in terms of they're allowing 110.7 rush yards per game. That's not like, it's kind of mid as far as how they've been doing. Let's see, yards per carry, they're allowing just 3.5 yards per carry. So I don't know, maybe they've gotten a little bit better recently. I'm not enthusiastic. I mean, it's just like the Brahmas offense has just not been great in general.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be super enthusiastic about anybody, especially when they are kind of spreading it around generally. So probably not a ton.
Yeah, for me, it'll probably only be a couple shares, largely paired with the Brahmas defense. I'd love to say, maybe he's a great run back on Memphis stacks, because if Memphis gets up, he'll earn the routes. Unfortunately, Neil, last week, Corbin was at a 41% route share. Aiden Robbins was at 38%. So I don't know that they necessarily prioritize Corbin in the passing game, even though that, to me at least makes logical sense that you would want to get him more pass game work over Robbins. So yeah, it's pretty thin. Like I said, I'm probably only going that direction paired with the San Antonio defense. And then you just hope, the Brahmas really, really dominate. in this one. All right. I think we're all good here. We can move on to our next game. Important note, 2 games kicking off Saturday at 1 p.m. simultaneously. So we do not have a 2-game Sunday slate. We have a 2-game Saturday slate. And I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they're on different networks. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to go about trying to watch both games at the same time. A little bit frustrating from like a fan perspective. Obviously, I love watching every game. But yeah, both of these games will be kicking off at 1 p.m. on Saturday, the next 2 games that we discuss here. So if you want to play the 2-game slate, be sure to get your lineups in before 1 p.m. on Saturday. The first of those 2 games that we will discuss is the Michigan Panthers at the Houston Roughnecks. Michigan is favored by 6.5. This line started right around 4, and Michigan has just been continuously bet up throughout the week. Total here is up to a slate leading 43.5. Arlington and DC had the highest total pretty much the whole week, and this flipped, I believe, last night or early yesterday. On the injury front, Neil, I should ask before I talk injuries. Any interest in this game? Michigan favored by 6.5, total 43.5. That probably feels about right. I might be a tad tempted by the under, actually.
Yeah, I might also be. I mean, Michigan's been so good; it's sort of hard to bet on the under.
Yeah,
I might want to take Michigan plus the points, that they'll win by more than 6. I think that's an angle that I might like. Although Houston just continues to surprise, like they've been better than expected. So maybe I'm just wrong at this point, but I think I have enough faith in Michigan that I probably prefer taking Michigan plus the points.
Man, if you only watched the first like 4 drives from Houston last week, you would have thought Jalen McClendon was Tom Brady. I mean, he was not missing anything. He looked absolutely fantastic to start the game, and then that offense just totally died. That was quite a wild game. On the injury front here, Bryce Perkins was limited this week, but I really don't expect any issues when it comes to his availability. He finished the game last week, and we all know he loves to hurdle people, so it's probably just a result of his heroic hurdle last week. On the Houston side, Kirk Merritt did not practice on Tuesday, but he did practice in a limited fashion on Wednesday. His availability is crucial. We will know more about that in a few hours. That is the luxury of 2 Saturday games, Neil, as we will have 75% of our depth charts by probably around 8 p.m. tonight. So we should have a pretty good grip on the slate by the end of the day today. Neil, we'll start with the Michigan Panthers here. Bryce Perkins continues to just be absolutely amazing. I sort of wrote it up the same way last week, but to me, he's effectively, from a rushing perspective, Deebo Samuel, on top of being the most efficient quarterback in the UFL. He's broken a tackle on half of his carries, which is like basically unheard of. A little bit of a small sample. I believe he only has 46 carries on the year, but still 23 broken tackles on 46 carries is insane. And just watching the film, I mean, it looks like no one can bring him down. His contact balance is just absurd. I love Bryce Perkins this week. I'm sure the field will too. We have him projected right now for right around 32% ownership. I think in like higher stake stuff like the 222, he'll probably be closer to 50% owned. This feels like a great spot for him, especially when you consider the total now that it's been bet up to 43.5. This looks like a really good spot for Perkins. Where are you at here?
Yeah, I mean, hard not to love Perkins. Any matchup really, he just looks great. Love the matchup with Houston, although they have only been allowing 174 passing yards per game over the past 3 weeks and only 100 rush yards. So their defense has kind of been playing better than they had been early in the year. I'm still willing to play Bryce Perkins against them. I'm probably going to be, maybe I'll set my cap at 30% again, so I'll probably be right at 30% Bryce Perkins. I think I'm pretty happy with that number.
Yeah, I might go as high as like 50% on Bryce Perkins. I really don't mind taking a stand on a guy who, like I mentioned before, is going to be on an NFL roster sooner than later. Also, other note with the Houston defense being a little bit better, I did think, Birmingham ran all over them. Like both Maribel and Person had 2 of their more efficient games of the year, and Birmingham's really struggled to run the ball. So I don't necessarily put a ton of stock into the matchup, on top of just like my general philosophy is that Bryce Perkins is pretty much matchup proof, especially in this league. The other thing that makes Bryce Perkins really nice, Neil, is that we know who his top 3 wide receivers are going to be. Malik Turner, Cioce Mariner, Jalen Moore. All 3 of them were above an 82% route share last week. Malik Turner actually at 97%. He leads the league in route share this season. I like all of these guys. I think Jalen Moore is a really interesting angle if you want sort of a lower owned player. I was a little surprised, honestly, Neil, when we ran our sort of initial projections. Cioce Mariner came out with a pretty massive number, but I feel good about it. He's been earning targets. We know he's a great player. Plus, unlike Malik Turner, COC Mariner's volume is a bit more downfield. So I think there's room for more explosives there. Do you have any favorites here? For me, it'll probably be largely mixing and matching. If weird stuff happens on the Friday game and I determine, I need to make some swaps, I don't necessarily hate getting off a Turner or a Mariner for a Jalen Moore. But obviously he's third on the target pecking order right now.
Yeah, no, I think all three look great. I think I would if I had to rank them in order based on their price tag and ownership, it would probably be COC Mariner first for me, just because he's cheaper than Malik Turner and getting 10% less ownership. And I think he's pretty close with Turner in terms of their range of outcomes. Maybe I'm too bullish, but
I think Malik Turner has a much better floor. Like if I'm playing cash, I would definitely prefer Malik Turner, but for tournaments, they're pretty similar to me.
Yeah. So it's probably Turner for me, and then maybe even Jalen Moore. Like I really like Turner, Mariner, and then maybe Moore, and then Mariner, Turner, just because he is 34% projected ownership is quite a bit. But I like all three of them. I'm probably going to be pretty close to the field on even Turner. But my guess would be I'll be over the field on Mariner at 24% and considerably over the field, like maybe double the field on Jalen Moore. So 20% Jalen Moore, something like that. I think I like all three of them quite a bit.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, especially if you're going to play a lot of Perkins, I certainly don't mind leaning into the Jalen Moore angle there. This backfield, Neil, this could be really gross. We're not exactly sure yet what they're going to do with Matthew Colburn. Mike Nolan, during his midweek media availability, basically said, we need Colburn to get a full week of practice under his belt. We need to see how he looks, and then we'll go from there. Unlike previous seasons, we also know Michigan is comfortable keeping 3 running backs active and actually getting them all usage. So this could be really gross if we find out that it's, Toa Taua, Matthew Colburn, and Nate McCrary all active. My hope is that one of Colburn or McCrary ends up inactive, and then that will make things a lot cleaner for Toa Taua. Right now we have Colburn projected out. I'm going to wait for the depth charts before I adjust that. Where are you at on this backfield? I would assume, 3-man backfield, all these guys become very, very thin. I'd still maybe want a little bit of Toa Taua, but he's very expensive now, $8,800. 2-man backfield, though, I think Taua looks pretty good. And, even a McCrary or a Colburn could be considered viable, especially if you think this game's going to be higher scoring. Where are you at?
What's Colburn's price? Do you have that in front of you?
Let's see. It might be a player pool thing. Let me search him up. He is not in the player pool right now. I'm sure they'd add him. I mean, they just added Magoo, so it's probably just a matter of him actually being active.
I think I agree with your assessment, though. Like if it is 3, I maybe would have a little bit of Toa Taua, but not. I wouldn't be playing a ton. If it is 2, though, then I'd have a lot of interest in Toa Taua, like especially on a slate where I'm not really in love with the running backs. I think I might even be above the 27% we have projected going to Toa Taua. I just think he would look great in that situation. Great matchup. If we get one of them inactive, I will play probably a lot of Toa Taua. If we have all 3 active, I don't know. I'll have to see where the ownership shakes out at, but I'd probably play a little bit of Toa Taua just like as insurance, but I wouldn't be super enthusiastic.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether it's 2 running backs or 3 running backs active, Taua's touchdown equity is just awesome. Nobody has more rush attempts or inside the 5 carries than Taua over the last 3 weeks. And I mean, we saw it even last week, Neil, in their incredible comeback. They had one play with 1 second left from the 1-yard line, and they gave it to Toa Taua. And then they ran another play from the 1-yard line for 1 point for the win, and they gave it to Toa Taua. I mean, it's very obvious. McCrary will still work in a little bit for inside the 5 stuff. But yeah, I mean, the touchdown equity here is awesome. I think the touchdown equity would be especially awesome, Neil, if it was Taua and Colburn as the only 2 active running backs. Taua and McCrary, you could always argue McCrary does deserve some inside the 5 work. He's a bigger body, powerful runner. Colburn doesn't really offer that, though. So this could be, I mean, I'll probably bump Taua's projection even a little bit more than what we have right now. We've got him at 15.3. Again, that's only with 2 running backs active. I could see him getting to 16.5 or something if it's just him and Matthew Colburn this week. So that would be a pretty tempting play there. For the 2-game slate, I think Gunnar Oaks might be viable here. He's been earning some targets, right around a 50% route share. I'd probably mix him in to Bryce Perkins lineups just a tad for the 2-game slate. Would anybody else here interest you for the 2-gamer? Say it's a 3-man backfield, would you be excited to play like a McCrary or a Colburn on the 2-game slate?
I would probably play some on the 2-game slate. Yeah, like
Okay.
at least McCrary I think would be interesting to me. I guess
Yeah.
Colburn depends on where the price tag comes out at, but yeah, on the 2-game slate, I think, especially because we are just like it might be nobody gets to 12 fantasy points on the 2-game slate of the running backs, so
Yeah.
it could be just like he scores the 1 touchdown, gets 9 fantasy points, and that's what you want. So yeah, I would on the 2-game slate have some interest in McCrary. Colburn depends on the price, and obviously yeah, I want some Tawa.
Definitely like that. All right, Neil, we can move on to the Houston side of this game. Jim McClendon has been playing really, really well. Roughnecks are still fighting for playoff positioning, by the way. If they win out, they will make the playoffs, which is a pretty crazy thing to say about a CJ Johnson coach team. Despite CJ trying his best to prevent them from making the playoffs, Jalen McClendon might actually be able to will these guys in. They do have a tough schedule, though. 2 matchups against Michigan, and I forget who the other game was against, but playing Michigan twice is pretty brutal in the final 3 weeks for Houston. McClendon, I mean, last week, like I said, we saw the upside. He looked absolutely fantastic. He wasn't running a ton, but man, did he look great as a thrower. Of course, this offense did die a little bit in the second half, but this is a great game environment, and Houston should be playing from behind here. That should force the ball into McClendon's hands a little bit more. Neil, at 12% ownership, I find myself liking McClendon quite a bit here. What about you?
Yeah, same page. This game could just be a shootout.
Oh,
He
yeah.
is $1,700 less expensive than Bryce Perkins, so he doesn't like need to match him point for point. But yeah, so I think it could be a really strong spot. So I do like Jalen McClendon quite a bit, and I like that we have pretty easy. I mean, we have one really easy pass catcher with him, and then a mixture of guys we can consider there. But like we know that we want Justin Hall in those lineups, so that's pretty nice too.
Yeah, and it's been really frustrating with any non-Justin Hall wide receiver. That's sort of the thing. McClendon
Yeah.
is a very easy single stack. He's a very difficult double stack. I'm still not exactly sure what to do here. Marcus Sims was out there for 18% of routes. I mean, you could argue he missed the prior week. Maybe he's just not fully healthy, but this is just such weird usage for a guy that they traded a starting tackle for. I would imagine the ceiling on Marcus Sims routes this week is probably 40 or 50%. And if he does hit that number, Kiki Chisholm's route share is likely going to come down pretty significantly. Yeah, this is a really tough assessment. Emmanuel Butler and Lawrence Keys were at 60 and 53% of routes, respectively. So, I mean, I don't necessarily know that I can get to any compelling double stacks here. I think if I had to pick somebody, it would probably be Chisholm. I mean, Keys is an okay value, but I do think that his route share is pretty unsecured. I mean, they've been all over the place with these alternate wide receivers. Anyone who isn't Justin Hall, where are you at here?
What did Cyril Grayson's route share end up at?
I believe he was at 25%, which certainly adds some frustration to things. I don't know why he reappeared, why they re-signed him.
Yeah.
And it's also weird because to me, I mean, Marcus Sims is a much better player, but to me, Sims and Cyril Grayson have kind of redundant skill sets. They're both guys that can run really fast in a straight line.
Could be a loyalty thing. Like
it could be. Cyril Grayson has a pretty good resume too. He was like a national champion in track in college. He won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers back in the day. So, there's that. But yeah, I mean, this is just really, really weird. I said in my article I could try to articulate an argument for Kiki Chisholm that largely revolves around him having a strong red zone target role. We know they like to throw jump balls to him in the end zone, but Marcus Sims pushes for a 50% route share. Chisholm is just total dust here. So, where are you at? Any interest in these secondary wide receivers, or are we just going to largely single stack McClendon? Yeah.
Now I'm like, it makes me like McClendon a little bit less. Now that I'm thinking about it, because like I'm with you, like I don't feel great about any of these other receivers, and I'm definitely not like forcing the double stack with McClendon. It's really tough to figure out who you want to play beyond Justin Hall. But if you're just single stacking McClendon with Justin Hall, you're running into a large percent of the field that's playing that exact stack, just a single stack with Justin Hall. So then, I mean, it's a small enough field tournament that it's like you're down to probably 100 of those lineups. If we're projecting around 10% ownership for McClendon. I'm debating if I want to go anywhere else. Chisholm, like, He had 14 yards and a touchdown in the first half, 0 fantasy points in the second half. It was gross last week. Now we're thinking the route share is going to come down. Hard to really love it. I think if the route share stays anywhere near where it is, he's still playable, just in under the assumption that this game is going to be kind of a shootout. Like, he's 6,200, so like the price isn't great, but playable. I think you could do a double stack. Like, if you really want to play into the narrative of, I think this is going to be a blowout, I don't hate the idea of double stacking Jalen McClendon with, I think Kiki Chisholm would probably be my second favorite. I don't know, maybe Marcus Sims. Like, do you think there's any world where Marcus Sims gets up to a 60% route share, just like where he was really just like still coming back from injury?
I could maybe see it if Cyril Grayson wasn't active. That would be some pretty helpful information, knowing, maybe Cyril Grayson or Emmanuel Butler, one of these guys, they just say, we don't need you this week. That would excite me a little bit more. I am a little bit tempted by Sims on the 2-game slate. I'm definitely not going to get there on the main slate. But yeah, I mean, personally, I'll probably just do, like, if I say I play 8 McClendon teams, I might do one that's a double stack with Keys and then another that's a double stack with Chisholm. I don't feel great about that. I know last week I ended up with a lot of McClendon plus Hall plus Saquandre White, which would be something that I'd be very interested in this week if Kirk Merritt sits. And that, I think, leads us to a pretty good transition to talk about this backfield. Zaquandre White earned 75% of backfield weighted opportunity, which was pretty much exactly what we expected with no Kirk Merritt. I mean, this is a bell cow workload for whoever remains, because the team does not want to give Lorenzo Lingard serious work here. We'll find this information out in a few hours, Neil, but if Kirk Merritt is active, would you have any interest in Saquandre? I probably won't play much at all.
I mean, I want to correct you when you say that they didn't want to play any Lorenzo Lingard, because I was getting chased by a lineup in the second half where I had Zaquandre White, and there was a lineup right behind me that did not have Zaquandre White, and I think he put up negative fantasy points in the second half. While felt like they gave Lorenzo Lingard like 50% of the work in the second half. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think
they just didn't run many plays in the second half. Like, I rewatched the game last night, and it felt like it was just 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out for Houston. So I think, maybe if I did a deep dive in the second half usage, it could have been closer to 50-50, but it's probably more of a function of just, like, I think they ran like 15 plays in the second half.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe that's true. I remember him, like, I was shocked that there was like, this guy ran for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half, and you're just giving it to Lorenzo Lingard. It was the most CJ thing ever. And it gives me some pause when it comes to Zaquandre White. It's a tough matchup for Zaquandre White. He is 8,200. It'll be kind of tough with Kirk Merritt out there, but I do think at this point, like, I'm sold that that Zaquandre White seems to be the favorite there, like over Kirk Merritt when they're all there. But like you say, like you keep citing the stats of, like, it seems like it's a pretty big difference when they have 2 running backs active versus 3. So it's a little bit tough to get there. I might have a little bit just because we saw what he could do last week. And again, I'm not loving this running back slate in general. So I'll probably get to a few shares of Zaquandre White. But I'm not that enthusiastic if all 3 are active.
Yeah, I could see a couple shares, and there is a real chance that, like, Merritt would play and only earn a 20% snap share, let's say, because he's a little beat up. I don't really like throwing the injury prone label around, but he's probably also a little bit more injury sensitive than a guy like Zaquandre is at this point. So yeah, I might end up with like a couple shares, like you said, out of my 35 teams in the $20 on Zaquandre. But man, I'd really like him. If Merritt was out, he would be, I think, pretty easily my favorite running back play, even though he is a little expensive at 8,200. Yeah. All right. We can move on here unless you have anything else on this game, Neil.
No. I almost want to say, like, Butler. Like, you brought up Keys. Would you have any interest in Emmanuel Butler? I don't know. He ran 60% of the routes last week. He's 4,000. Doing that double stack. Do you have
2-game slate? Maybe. I've always thought Emmanuel Butler's, like, pretty good. Like, I'd love to see Emmanuel Butler in a full-time starting role. Houston's just always been weird with his usage. The other thing with Emmanuel Butler is, like, for seemingly no rhyme or reason, there will be weeks where he runs 25% of routes, and then weeks where he runs like 50 to 70%. And I still haven't exactly pinned down why that is. So there is, like, quite a bit of fragility in Emmanuel Butler's route share. Like I said, for the 2-game slate, I think you could justify it. You could pretty much justify just about any Houston wide receiver outside of Cyril Grayson, I think, on the 2-game slate. But yeah, it is a shame that they've been just all over the map with these wide receiver rotations for anyone who isn't Justin Hall. All right, Birmingham Stallions at the St. Louis Battlehawks. Birmingham is a 1.5 point underdog here. The total is 39.5. Neil, I really like Birmingham. I kind of like Birmingham money line. I like Birmingham plus 1.5. I think they're a better team. Hard for me to quantify the St. Louis home field advantage. That is sort of the wild card, and that is why I haven't personally bet this line. But of all the spreads on the board this week, I think this would easily be my favorite, Birmingham plus 1.5. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's a good call. St. Louis just not the same team with Max Duggan. So I think that's good play.
And I also think we'll find out here in a few hours, but there is a chance Alex Magoo ends up as the starter. There's also a chance Jamar Smith ends up as the starter, and Case Cookus practiced in full on Wednesday. So I think he's healthy enough to start as well. So there's, it's pretty much wide open for the Birmingham quarterback situation. I think if it's announced as Magoo, I mean, he obviously looked really rusty in the only full game that we saw him, but I might just outright bet Birmingham plus 1.5 if it's announced as Magoo. Other luxury, guys, with UFL betting lines is that if you do see any breaking news, it's like 30 minutes before the line actually adjusts, which is really awesome. So we should have plenty of time to get any bets based on Alex Magoo's availability in with no problems. On the injury front, Case Cookus practiced in full yesterday. As I already mentioned, he should be available this week. But again, we just don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be for Birmingham right now. Amari Rogers also has not practiced all week with a hamstring injury. If he's out, that's definitely worth a boost to Davion Davis and Marlon Williams, who have largely occupied that slot role this season. Especially Marlon Williams has mostly played outside, but whenever Amari Rogers has injury issues, they immediately move him to the slot. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Nothing to worry about on the St. Louis side. Neil, Birmingham, I guess we have to talk about 3 different quarterback scenarios here. Cause like I said, it's totally up in the air. I'd be pretty excited to play a $9,800 Alex Magoo. Jamar Smith is 9,300, and then Case Cookus is also 9,300. Do you have thoughts on those guys? I feel okay about Jamar and Cookus, but I think Magoo could really slide under the radar, being a late addition to the injury pool or to the player pool. We haven't seen him play all year, so I think people are have probably largely forgotten that he was like one of the greatest fantasy quarterbacks of all time when he was in the USFL in 2023. This could be a pretty sneaky play in Alex Magoo. What do you think about these quarterbacks in general?
Yeah, it's tough because it's a tough matchup with St. Louis. Like they have a pretty strong defense, one of the top, I'd say, 2 defenses in the league. So don't love that. I think I'm with you that Magoo, if he is the starting quarterback, like named the starter, would feel pretty good. I don't know that I'd play that much. I think it'd still be like maybe I'd play 10% or so of Alex Magoo. If it's one of the other guys, probably less than 10%. I do think that I will have some of whichever quarterback is named as a starter, unless they come out and say like, no, we're going to be splitting time, doing a rotation, something like that. If they just come out and name a starter, I will have some of whoever that starter is, but I don't think I would have more than 10% of whoever it is. Do you see it differently than that?
I would probably jack Magoo up a little higher than that personally. Maybe I'm just a little too biased toward his 2023 USFL performance, but I mean, this is a guy who is very capable of great fantasy performances. The other thing with Birmingham, they've been running a ton of plays and moving with a lot of pace lately. They basically, last few weeks have come close to matching DC in terms of their total plays per game. Last week, just from watching the game, it really didn't seem like they snapped the ball with any less than like 10 seconds left on the play clock. You can compare that to a team like St. Louis, which snaps the ball with 1 second left on the play clock every single time. That does lead to a pretty big difference in just raw plays. So I would like Magoo a pretty good bit here because I think Birmingham could be a team that could push for 65 or even 70 plays if the game plays out correctly. Let's talk pass catchers here. Sternberger had a really strong game last week. Davion Davis also emerged with a 77% route share. I think that was largely a function of Amari Rogers suffering that hamstring injury. He was down to a 19% route share last week. Still, though, if Amari Rogers is out, which I'm leaning towards him being out at this point, probably 80%, 70% likely to be out. again, we will find this out in a few hours. Davion Davis is looking at like a 70 to 80% route share. Marlon Williams will still work in a little bit, but they also use Marlon Williams on the outside. So this could be a really good role for Davion Davis. And he really hasn't done anything all year. He has one game above double-digit fantasy points. But with no Amari Rodgers and with Alex Magoo, again, these two had a great connection back in the 2023 USFL. I could really see myself getting above the field on a guy like Davion Davis, who I don't believe is projecting for much ownership at all. Yeah, we have him at 3.3%. I think most of the field will drift towards Jay Sternberger and Deion Kane, because those are the guys we can feel the best about, especially given, the past week's performances. Where are you at on these wide receivers?
I mean, did Deion Kane do anything last week? I feel like I don't remember him.
Oh, no, he did not. He almost, Cookus underthrew him on what would have been like a 70-yard touchdown. I mean, pretty standard. Like, we know who Deion Kane is. He's going to earn between 4 and 6 targets, but it seems like every other week he scores a 60-yard touchdown. Not a ton in the red zone. Like, they want to go to the slot, want to go to the tight ends a little bit more in the red zone. But I still think people will want to click Deion Kane because he's had those 20-point games in the past.
Yeah, and he's not getting much ownership here. We've got Deion Kane projected for 6% ownership. He's frustrating because it's like, which lineups do you want to move him? He like feels like he's a late swap type play. Like, you want to put him in there if you like need big upside, but then it's like, do you really want to take him out all of your lineups that are doing well? Because like, he could just put up 20 points and I don't know. He's a tough one for me. But I think 6% feels about right for Deion Kane, just because he does have just a wide range of outcomes. Jay Sternberger, finally gets it done last week. To bury me, of course.
Me too, brother.
Yeah, I mean, he buried you more than me, I guess. He cost you $3,000. But I think he's still cheap enough that I want to play some Jay Sternberger. I think I'm less confident in the ownership projection, just because he did do so well last week finally. So now he's at 6% ownership, which I guess is like double what he had been projected at in previous weeks. And he was, I think, 4,300. Now he's 4,600. But I think just like we finally saw it, so people are going to be more willing to buy in. But I still think, 4,600, pretty strong price on Sternberger. I'm not super enthusiastic about any of these guys just because of the matchup. But Davion Davis, I do like him. 4,800. I'll be certainly above 3%, regardless of who the quarterback is. And if it is Magoo, then yes, I will be playing a lot of Davion Davis because of the connection that they've shown in the past. The price tag is pretty nice at 4,800. Ultimately I'll have a little bit, I think, of Deion Kane. I think 6% feels about right. I'll be above 6%, I'm sure, on Jay Sternberger, and Davion Davis, probably my favorite of the bunch. But particularly if Magoo is the quarterback, I will have a lot.
All right. Sounds like we're pretty aligned there. For the 2-game slate, I also wanted to throw out Jordan Thomas, as always. I feel like he's like the ultimate showdown 2-game slate kind of play, but just not a guy I can quite get to on the main slate. Like I say every week, all of his targets are either 20 yards downfield or in the end zone. There's like nothing else. It's kind of a crazy fantasy profile, but definitely one to lean into for, like I said, 2-game slate. We do not have a showdown, unfortunately, for this one. Only one showdown slate. It's on the Sunday only game. They did bless us, Neil, though. 2K to first on the Sunday only showdown.
Nice. Okay.
Which is pretty good. So biggest showdown prize pool we've had in probably about a month here. Backfield. Neil, I think this was the first time all season, and obviously, as a Ricky Person fanboy, I was very excited to see this. First time all season, I'm pretty sure, that we've had Ricky Person projected for more points than CJ Maribel. And, this is partially a function of last week's usage, obviously skewing in favor of Person. 57% of backfield weighted opportunity for him. The other 43% went to Maribel. I also think, though, they're coming around to him just being the better player. And early in the season, we didn't really see it. I mean, they were struggling so much to run the ball that both him and Maribel were averaging like 2.5 yards per carry. Last 3 weeks, though, Neil, Ricky Person has been at 4.2 yards per attempt. CJ Maribel, 2.8. So pretty massive difference between these two. And just from watching the film, I mean, Person has looked really, really good these last couple of games. This is, when I said last year that he's going to become the Cowboys starting running back, this is the man that I envisioned. The way he's been running the last couple of weeks was what I had in my head. So this is pretty exciting for me as a Ricky Person fanboy. I think my favorite way to play him, a little similar to Corbin, paired with his respective defense. St. Louis, with the way Max Duggan is playing, this is a team, and we've seen it before, that can lead to some really big defensive scores for their opposing defense. Because, Max Duggan's accuracy is really, really bad. He also takes a lot of sacks. So I like Person, especially if Birmingham ends up kind of dominating this game. But where are you at on this backfield overall? Any love for Person as either a standalone or paired with the Birmingham defense?
I like him in both of those scenarios, both standalone and I certainly compare him with the Birmingham defense. It's not a play that I again because the matchup is so tough. I'm not super enthusiastic about it, but the price is right on Person. I think it is possible that he's taken hold of this backfield and maybe will take on an even bigger role. And he's 4% projected ownership at 6,900. The offensive line also like doesn't grade out that horribly by PFF. Like in my mind, they are just like in a atrocious offensive line. They're rated out as the third best in terms of run blocking on the season, which I don't know how much weight you put into these grades. Hard to get super enthusiastic about them in a tough matchup, given that the run blocking is still subpar. I mean, it seems like they're according to PFF, Michigan and St. Louis have pretty, they kind of separate from the rest of the field. And then it's Birmingham, Memphis, DC, Arlington all have between 50 and 54% or rating in run blocking. So they're all pretty similar. Ultimately, I think just betting on the talent of Ricky Person at low ownership seems like a good bet. Somebody I'd want to be probably double the field.
Yeah, especially 4% on a slate where, like we've said, Neil. I mean, like if Kirk Merritt's active, there are no running backs that I'm like really excited to click this week. So why not throw a little bit of Ricky Person out there? And I've also always felt like on these middling running back slates, like these are the weeks Ricky Person just always happens to score like 15 or 20 fantasy points for whatever reason. So yeah, I'm of course excited to play my boy. I'll probably be double or triple the field on Person. I don't think I'm gonna get to any Maribel on the 2-game slate. Of course, both are viable. You can even play both on the same lineup, especially if you think Birmingham's going to dominate. I don't think I have anything else to add on this team. Just making sure I didn't miss anybody. Yeah. All right. We can move on to the St. Louis Battlehawks side of this game. Neil, this is Max Duggan is effectively a running back playing quarterback at this point. A few weeks ago, I compared him to Case Cookus. I think after watching more film of these two, these guys are in different tiers. Like Case Cookus is willing to die on the field. Max Duggan, I think, wants to die on the field. He's playing with so much grit. It's literally all willpower. Like it's the only reason he's playing professional football right now. He's incredibly limited as a passer. He's kind of athletic, but not like athletic enough to really pop. It's just all like I'm diving everywhere. I'm taking contact every single time. Like this guy's never learned to slide. It's fun to watch, but for fantasy, it kind of sucks because he can't throw to anybody. Where are you at on Max Duggan this week? I think this is a really difficult ownership projection because he's projecting as a good value, but there's just like no one I really feel good stacking him with. And I also don't think this is a particularly great game environment. I'd kind of rather go, like if we're talking secondary quarterbacks, kind of rather go to like a McClendon or a Luis Perez who are playing in way better game environments than a Duggan. But you can obviously make an argument for a guy who's running the ball like crazy. What do you think?
Yes, and I felt like he almost buried us last week. Like he had the rushing touchdown early, and then I think he had another touchdown, a passing touchdown that was maybe called back, or like maybe they came up just short of the end zone. I forget what it was exactly, but it felt like I was almost really regretting not playing enough Max Duggan. I think I pivoted off him in some of my better lineups. Ultimately, he's getting 7% ownership. I don't think that is a terrible number. I'm not sure that I get there though. I think I might not end up with any Max Duggan since I'm not playing 150 these days. I think I might not get to Max Duggan just because of the game environment. But I have no real issue with 7% ownership. I think it's totally fine.
Yeah, I am. I'm pretty similar. I'll probably get to a few Max Duggan teams. Obviously, Neil, one of the toughest parts about Max Duggan is like, who exactly do we stack him with? We know Hakeem Butler can put up these monster scores, but we also know, just based on what we saw last week, Hakeem Butler can do absolutely nothing. He zeroed last week. So, this is really, really tough when no one's earning targets. I mean, Butler was at, Butler actually had 0 targets. Frank Darby was at 5. Ja'Cory Pearson was at 5. Gary Jennings had 4, and then no one else was higher than 2. So it's just so little passing volume. I mean, it is nice that Duggan's willing to throw it deep, but these deep balls are very, very inaccurate. Where are you at with the stacking partners here? For me, it'll probably be mostly Butler, just banking on that, sort of slate winning score, even though he is a little bit more expensive. I think you could also make an argument for Frank Darby. Ja'Cour Pearson feels a little too expensive to be viable. Yeah, where are you at here?
Oh, do we have both the games starting at the same time on Saturday?
Yes. Yeah,
I
1
hate that
p.m.
so
kickoff for
much.
both
Oh
of
god.
them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. From
that's
like a viewership standpoint, it really sucks. Like, especially we're league enjoyers, right? So we just want to watch every game. I'm sure there are fans of these teams too that are going to be cut out of, because I don't know if they're both on Fox or both on ESPN, or what the deal is with the broadcast, but I'm sure there will be like some Battlehawks fans or whatever that just can't watch one of the games, which is obviously super annoying. So I think they did this to us twice last year. Hopefully this is the only time this year. I haven't checked the rest of the schedule, but fingers crossed.
So I bring that up because I was thinking like this is probably like a late swap kind of stack. Like it's because it does have clearly like omega upside if like those inaccurate long passes he just connects on a couple of
Yeah.
those, and he runs for 70 yards and gets 2 long touchdowns. Like that could be enough for Max Duggan to be absolutely awesome. Like I said, I'm probably not getting there. And then Hakeem Butler was 6,300 a couple weeks ago, and we really loved him at 6,300. Now he's up to 8,300 a week after goose egging becomes kind of tough, but we know that he still has the 100 yards on 2 catches upside, and who knows, he could have 5 catches and have 4 touchdowns. Like that is within the range of outcomes. I'm not enthusiastically playing a ton of Hakeem Butler, but at 8%, like he clearly has that mega upside, where he could separate you from the field. So I think I'll probably be around, I might even be higher. Like if I, depending on how Friday night goes for me, I could see myself swapping onto a lot of this game in lineups that just like have a dead spot getting to.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of changing my tune on like, I don't think I'm going to go into the slate with any Max Duggan, but I do think it is one of the best late swap opportunities to get onto, like Max Duggan, Hakeem Butler, or even like Max Duggan, Ja'Cour Pearson, like those types of, maybe, I don't know, Ja'Cour Pearson doesn't have that kind of like 50-yard touchdown often in his range of outcomes, so maybe not. But yeah, at least Duggan and Butler, when I have a roster with a dead spot, kind of makes sense as like a great late swap. But probably not a lot going into the slate.
Yeah, it's just tough with Pearson. I mean, obviously he's a target earner, but these targets are just not downfield. Like last week, he had 3 receptions. He had 6 total receiving yards.
He used to be a guy who would have those long touchdowns, like when he was back on Seattle. Was he on the Sea Dragons? Is that right?
Yeah, the Sea Dragons. They were, man, what a fantastic offense. Danucci averaged like 350 passing yards per game in that offense. That was really great. He was always yelling at June Jones to get the play in on time, which was awesome. I love that. All that said, Ja'Cour Pearson did have 84 air yards last week, so you could argue those long touchdowns are in his range of outcomes. It's just not something we've seen, and in most games, he's looking at 5 targets for like 20 air yards. Like there's just nothing really downfield. I think him, Darby, and Butler are all viable, especially on the 2-game slate. Actually, Pearson and Darby, I think are pretty interesting pairings with Max Duggan. You could even argue for a little bit of Gary Jennings, who could also go for one of those longer touchdowns. He was out there for a 67% route share last week. So I think all those guys would be viable for the 2-game slate. On main, I'm probably only getting to Butler and maybe a little bit of Darby on my Duggan lineups, but it's then also, you do not have to stack Max Duggan at all. Like I mean, if I played 10 Max Duggan lineups, I don't know about you, Neil, but I'd probably say 4 or 5 of them would be no stacking partner. What do you think?
I mean, I always stack. So I just think like if you're getting the major upside for Max Duggan, I guess he could have 100 yards rushing and get the bonus on the ground. So maybe
he could have 3 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah. So maybe you're right. You could do it for sure. I'm typically going to be stacking and hoping that he just happens to connect on one of those long balls to Hakeem Butler. So I think I'm usually stacking, but I don't hate I think you're right. You can play him naked.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I tweeted this out. It really had no place in my article, but Max Duggan's rushing workload, he's a quarterback, obviously, so he doesn't catch any passes, but by weighted opportunity, it's on par with the workload Kirk Merritt has earned on a per game basis this year, which I just think is pretty funny. Yeah. Backfield here, it's pretty much all Jacob Sailors. It was interesting last week. Jarvion Howard did play more than usual. He was at 33% of backfield weighted opportunity was Jarvion Howard, which is certainly more than we've grown used to in the past couple weeks. I did make a note that I think this was because on Howard's first carry, he ran for like 18 or 20 yards. So I think they were a little bit more willing to give him some carries after that. I still expect this to be roughly 80-20, maybe 85-15 though, moving forward. Do you have any interest in Sailors? His price has come down significantly. He's down to 10K now. He's also not projecting for much ownership, only 16%. This is probably the most tempted I've been by Sailors in a couple weeks, I'd say.
And I've been playing Sailors every week, and he's been letting me down every week. I think this is the week that I actually finally drop off a lot of my Sailors ownership. Any interest? Yeah, I think I'll probably play some Jacob Sailors. I still think that he has pretty big upside. It's a really tough matchup with Birmingham. They've allowed just 69 yards per game over the past 3 weeks. Pretty nice job by the Birmingham defense there. So I don't think I'm going to get to, and he's 10,000. He's way more expensive than this, but because like we've said also many times, running backs are pretty weak on this slate. You need to play at least one running back. So yeah, I think I'll get to some Jacob Sailors, but we have the project ownership. I guess it's down to 16%. I was thinking actually I'd read a higher number there. At 16%, I might be just like with the field. I think that's a fair number on Jacob Sailors, just given the opportunities that he gets, but I can't get to any more than that because of the tough matchup.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I could probably see myself getting to like 20 or 25%. We'll see how things shake out, but this does feel like a pretty good week for me to play Jacob Sailors. It feels like everyone's, we're all kind of a little bit done with Jacob Sailors. We're looking elsewhere for running back production, but we can't forget, I mean, he's been dominating this backfield. This is a team that runs the ball like basically every play. Duggan has stolen a little bit of touchdown upside, but I think, Sailors' underperformance these last few weeks has largely been a result of the offense just being outright worse with Max Duggan at quarterback. It hasn't necessarily been a huge usage issue for Jacob Sailors. All right, Neil, we can move on to our final game here. I think this is a fantastic finale to the slate. This is going to present us with a lot of really good late swap options too. And of course, this game also has its own showdown slate. It is the Arlington Renegades at the DC Defenders. Arlington is a 2.5-point underdog. Total here is 42.5. Neil, this spread feels about right to me. I honestly might like the over a little bit. I had this stat in my article when I was talking about, I believe it was Luis Perez, but it was with Teamu. But over the last 3 games, these teams have played against each other. They've combined for 70 points. That was in week 5 of this year, 57 points and 63 points. So for whatever reason, Neil, these teams have consistently led to shootouts when they've matched up against each other. And I think that's largely because they're just so familiar with each other. They've played each other 6 times since the 2023 XFL season. And at least in terms of, especially offensive coordinators, there's been no turnover. DC obviously had their Greg Williams and Reggie Barlow leave this past season, but from a schematic standpoint, they're basically the same team. Where are you at here on this betting line?
Yeah, I mean, that is 100% of the time, the past 3 games, this has gone over the total. So, I mean, how do you not bet the over there? Why not? I mean, I think I do like the over just because it's fun. But yeah, I think it's probably a fair line. I think it's actually like a good over bet. Do you agree with that? Do you think it's a good over bet? It's pretty close.
I kind of think so. I mean, these are 2 like really compelling offenses to me in general. Obviously just looking at the last 3 games and saying, they've gone over every time. That's a pretty fish way to look at it. But, the way I have this projected out is as a higher scoring game. These teams move with good pace as well. So, gun to my head, I'd probably say 42.5 is pretty close to a fair line. But I don't mind the over. If I had to bet something here, I would probably take the over given these teams' histories and given how good we've seen these offenses can both be.
And because it's more fun.
It is more fun. Yeah, that's always important. Betting, it doesn't always have to be for money. It can also be for fun, for the spirit of it all. Glad Neil has that perspective.
That's right.
All right. Only injury note here. Davion Smith has not practiced this week due to a knee injury. These teams have only reported 1 practice thus far, being the Sunday game. We should get some better info on Davion later tonight when they release Thursday injury reports. So I will be sure to update the Discord if it looks like Davion Smith is going to miss, because I would certainly add a lot of touchdown upside to this Arlington backfield. Before we get to the backfield, though, Neil, let's talk Luis Perez. One of the more, I think, sort of captivating, interesting stats that I had in my article against the DC Defenders. Luis Perez has averaged 20.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game. That's a 6-game sample. That's actually not too bad. In all other games this season, he's been at 13.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game. For whatever reason, Luis Perez has been really good against the DC Defenders. I think this is largely a function of Perez is probably the smartest quarterback in the league. He studies a ton of film. He seems to always know where to go with the ball on like a first or second read. And I think he's very good at reacting to some of these very heavy DC blitzes. So I do think there's a little juice there to Luis Perez, having a good fantasy performance this week. And if you look at our Luis Perez projection, it is about, a point, 2 points higher than he's generally been throughout this season. Where are you at on Perez this week?
Yeah, I think that's a strong read. I think that it might just be a matchup that he does well with. I like Perez. I think this is spot. Remember this when these teams played a few weeks ago. It was a week that I got everything wrong, except for the one thing that I got right was when I played these quarterbacks. And I was, I think, under the field on both of them. I double stacked them and just did full game stacks. I think that's how I'm going to approach it once again today. Is just I'm going to be overweight to Luis Perez. Just really lean into this game environment and double stack these quarterbacks. I think that's part of the reason that I think I'm likely at least going to go into the slate underweight on Max Duggan, or I might have 0 Max Duggan, is because I want to get a little bit higher than the field on Luis Perez and Jordan Teamu and force the double stack with the bringbacks and just hope that this game does continue in the trend that it has the past few games. So yeah, I think at what do we have 7% ownership on? Where was that? I closed the hang on.
I have 11% on Perez.
Oh, 11%. Yeah, I think 11% is a number that I'll probably be a little bit on top of. I mean, it's higher than 7%, so not a ton over that, but I think I'll be a little bit on top of that number with Luis Perez, and I'll just be mixing and matching my double stacks there.
Yeah, no, I think I'm right there with you. Sal Cannella and Tyler Vaughns are obviously going to be the most popular pairings with Luis Perez, and just, in general, if you're game stacking this game, those will be two very popular players. I do think Isaiah Winstead and Deontay Burnett have a little bit of juice. I was a little surprised when I ran our ownership numbers, Neil. Winstead was at 13%. Burnett was at 2%. I kind of expected those two to be a little bit closer in terms of raw ownership. But I pointed this out in my article. I'm trying to find it here. But these two have been, they rank 3rd and 7th in red zone targets over the full season. They've been consistently around 70% of routes, and they led the Renegades in receiving production the last time these teams played. Now, Deontay Burnett did have that sort of fluky, I believe it was like a one-handed catch, 40-yard touchdown. But still, I think the volume can be there, and I think the roles are pretty strong. How do you sort of rank these guys? We know Vaughns and Cannella are the top 2 options. That's not a mystery. How do you rank these guys after Vaughns and Cannella, though?
Yeah, after Vaughns and Cannella, so Deontay Burnett is 6,600, 2% projected ownership. JP Payton 5,100 at 0.3% projected ownership. That's kind of spicy. I don't hate that. And then where was Winstead? You had it like 13. Yeah, 13% at 6,100. He would probably be my third of the 3 because he has more ownership. I think he's fine at 6,100, 13% ownership. Okay. I might be like with the field there, but I'll be over the field on, obviously 0% going to JP Payton. I think I do want to take some shots there on a couple shots on JP Payton. It's probably Burnett over Payton for me, and then probably Winstead. It's always hard to talk about how my ownership relative to the field, how do I want to rank them exactly?
Yeah.
But I think ultimately I'll probably be pretty close to. So I think I will have the most of Isaiah Winstead. I guess is what I should how I should phrase it. Probably I'll have the most of Isaiah Winstead, then most likely Deontay Burnett. Probably not too far behind. My guess is I'll be just under 10%, and then I'll probably have 6% of JP Payton. I'll probably have a couple lineups there.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think I will be pretty similar. I also think Luis Perez is a guy that you can triple stack. You can do a Cannella, a Vaughns, and then one of those other 3 guys that we discussed. A lot of really fun combos that you can get to in this game. I also think this is a game that I feel very comfortable just going very, very heavy on. Maybe I play a defense from one of the first 3 games, and then I play 6 guys from this game. I think that's a viable lineup construction. Given the fireworks that we've seen from these teams previously, given the second best total on the slate at 42.5, and given the offenses are very, very competent here. Let's talk backfield, Neil. This is interesting. Davion Smith could miss, like I mentioned previously. Last week when it was just him and Day Hunter, I kind of thought they'd be in like a 70-30 split. Instead, it was just entirely Day Hunter in the backfield. Day Hunter earned 92% of backfield weighted opportunity. That was the second best workload by any running back this season. Also earned 20.2 weighted opportunities overall. Fell well below that by his DraftKings fantasy score, only 11.4 DraftKings points, but still 94% of snaps for Day Hunter. I mean, this was just a monster workload. That said, last week, Arlington signed Tony Jones, who's a bit of an NFL pedigree. You guys may remember he got some carries with the Saints. I believe he has, about 350 career NFL rushing yards and another 3 touchdowns on top of it. I do expect Tony Jones to be active this week. Tony Jones, Neil, is only 4,000, and we could see a bit of a split, kind of similar to what we saw with Day Hunter and Kalen Ballage. I would imagine it will still skew in favor of Hunter because he's been with the team longer. He's more familiar with the playbook. But at 4,000, Tony Jones is legitimately interesting to me, especially if Davion Smith is out. This workload for Tony Jones could be pretty good here. What do you think about these running backs? Because I'm pretty willing to play both.
Jake, if you go to the fantasy points data suite, go to advanced rushing and sort by explosive run rate. Number 2 of all running backs in the NFL last year in explosive run rate, Jacob Cabote, 20%. Number 1, Tony Jones.
Oh, let's go.
4 rushes, 1 explosive run on those 4 rushes, 25% explosive run rate.
My man.
If there's one thing I know about this DC defense, at least over the past few weeks, they've been allowing some explosive runs. Like they have been really so I'm obviously joking about the explosive run rates, but I agree with you. Tony Jones on a slate where we don't have running backs to get excited about, even if he gets 35% workload at 4,000, and he does just like break off 1 explosive run, which again DC has looked pretty vulnerable recently. I think he's pretty interesting. I think Tony Jones is somebody that I'm going to be triple the field on. I'm going to be taking shots, and it's a wide range of outcomes clearly because he might just not be involved at all. But I think at this min price, not getting a ton of ownership in a matchup that has been like the defense at least been vulnerable. I like the call of Tony Jones in particular as somebody that I want to be overweight to the field pretty significantly if he really does come in at like 5%. And Day Hunter, I don't know that I'll get to 37%, but I'll probably get to 25%. I think he's a pretty strong play on a slate that doesn't have a ton of great running back plays is I think where I'm at. Where are you at on these two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I think I like Jones the most of the two, but they're both very viable. And I could certainly see a world where, even if all 3 are active, Day Hunter still earns like 80% or 75% of backfield weighted opportunity. So I think there's a lot of juice for both of these guys potentially. And Neil, I mean, after this conversation, I find myself a little disappointed that I didn't start off my Day Hunter Tony Jones blurb with Tony Jones led the NFL in explosive run rate last year. Me too. Is such a funny statistic. I absolutely love that. But yeah, I mean, I think both of these guys are really good plays. I love mixing these guys into lineups with either Te'amu or Luis Perez because both will benefit if it ends up being a shootout script. Yeah, I think this is a pretty strong spot for both backs here. And I'm sure I don't know if I'll be overweight on Day Hunter. He's projecting for 37% ownership. I'll probably be around there, maybe 30%. Tony Jones, though, at 5%, I'll probably have closer to like 15, something like that in my lineups. I really like Tony Jones. Obviously a difficult projection between the two. We're not sure. I could see the backfield split, like I said, ranging anywhere from like 55-45 to 80-20, in favor of Day Hunter. But that still leaves plenty of meat on the bone for a guy like Tony Jones. Especially if it's a little bit closer to an even split. All right, Neil, let's talk DC defenders. This is still a team that's running a ton of plays, and this is still a team that's throwing the ball deep at an absurd rate. Jordan Te'amu, 48 deep passes on the year. That's more than the next 2 highest quarterbacks combined in terms of deep pass attempts of 20-plus yards. And that obviously makes this offense fantastic for fantasy. Another interesting note for this game, I don't think I included this in my article, but something I noticed, both of these teams ranked number 1 and number 2 in red zone pass rate, especially in the UFL. We have a lot of teams that are just running the ball every time when they get inside the red zone. Both these teams are right around a 55% pass rate in the red zone, which is pretty strong. So both of these passing games, again, look really, really good from a fantasy point perspective. Neil, Jordan Te'amu, to me, very clearly the second best quarterback play on the slate, just a hair behind Bryce Perkins. Where are you at on him? And then what do you think of these pass catchers? We saw Cornell Powell return to a normal route share last week. So I think we can feel pretty confident in who these top 3 pass catchers are going to be.
Yeah, I think Jordan Ta'amu looks great. I'm with you. Probably the second best quarterback option. Again, I think I've been setting my quarterback exposure cap at 30%. I think I'm going to keep it at 30% this week. So I anticipate getting to 30% of Jordan Ta'amu. I do think I'm going to require those double stacks with a bring back for Ta'amu also. So I'll also get to a good amount of these pass catchers. And yeah, Chris Rowland. I mean, man, what a massive letdown for most of the field
That was
last week.
crazy. Yeah, and his ownership like blew my mind. 64%
Yeah.
in the $20, 84% in the 333. The 333 ownership wasn't like totally shocking. 64% on main was crazy. I played 40%. I thought I'd be like roughly even with the field. I was way underweight on Roland, and that did end up helping me.
Yeah.
But yeah, really surprising. Teamu did just miss him on a handful of plays. Like if you do that game over, he probably scores 7 or 8 fantasy points, but still not a strong enough workload to justify the ownership on Roland last week.
I think it was just like in the couple weeks prior, it had seemed like he had like everything. Like he had both
Yeah.
the like long balls and he had the really safe, like short yardage, low A dot passes in previous weeks. So it felt really safe. And I think I had 49% Chris Rowland last week. So also onto the field, which was pretty lucky. And we've got him projected once again for 40% ownership. I think that's totally fair. I think I'll probably be right at the field at 40%. Like I think that is a reasonable number. 27% Cornell Powell at 6,700. I think is also a fair number. I think so. This is a slate where I'm going to be overweight on a lot of the pass catchers because I'm going to be underweight on most of the running backs. So I don't love any of the running backs. So I think I'm going to end up, particularly in this game, because I am doing a lot of double stacks with the bring back. I'm going to be probably overweight on a lot of the better pass catchers here, and those three in particular: Chris Rowland, Cornell Powell, and then Braylon Sanders up to 7,500 now. 18% ownership, I think, is totally reasonable. So I think, yeah, I'll be likely over the field on those three. I don't know if I'll get to. I didn't look at what's Jaden Mickens 54% route share. I don't think it's a worse play getting to a little bit of a Jaden Mickens if he's going to be running over half the routes. I don't think I'll get to a ton, but he's only 3,800, so I think that's pretty reasonable. I don't know that I'll get to any. Is Javon Antonio, are we anticipating he'll be active?
Yeah, I am right now. They did sign, I think it was Seth Williams, but I mean, generally speaking, especially DC, a wide receiver needs to be with the team for a little while before they end up playing. So I'd be really surprised if like Javon Antonio was inactive for Seth Williams. I'm like 90% sure I have that name right. But
okay, now I found it. It's 3,900, 2.7% ownership on Javon Antonio, 43% route share. It's I don't love it, but maybe if you're going to get to a pass catcher with under 50% route share, I think he's probably among the best of those options. But yeah, it's mostly going to be just mixing and matching the top three of Rowland, Powell, and Sanders.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I also think you can triple stack. I mean, this is something that I've been doing a ton of. Teamu plus all of Sanders, Powell, and who's the guy I'm forgetting about? Chris Rowland. I think that's plenty viable, especially in a game that we anticipate being more of a shootout. I think for showdown, that's probably where I'll have most of my interest in guys like Jaden Mickens and Javon Antonio. I don't know if I'll get there a ton on main slate, but I don't necessarily hate, like, if you're going to double stack Teamu, just especially if you're going to play a lot of it, sliding in a lineup that does have a Mickens share or two. I mean, he's got a decent projection, 3,800 with a 6.4 point projection. You could certainly do worse on this main slate. So yeah, I love this passing attack. I really want to heavily stack this game up. I want to heavily stack this team up. Any interest in like Briley Moore? He's a little expensive for main, but I think for showdown, he's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, It's tough to see him getting there on main. I guess they run enough plays. Like, he could score 2 touchdowns and have 3 receptions, and it might be enough.
Yeah.
But probably not going to get there on main. But yeah, on showdown, I think it's a strong play.
Yeah, I would agree. I do believe I didn't mention this because it's basically not super relevant, but Ben Bresnahan is dealing with a bit of an injury. So if he ends up missing, that would be like a slight projection boost for both Briley Moore and Mason Fairchild. I'd probably give most of that work to Mason Fairchild, but again, this is like very, very thinnest option on the showdown slate kind of discussion here. Backfield, Neil, I didn't really anticipate this. I sort of said last week, look, I think Deion Jackson has the lead, but it's probably like a 55-45 type of situation. That's what it broke down to in terms of weighted opportunity. Deion Jackson was at 58% of weighted opportunity. Abram Smith was at 38%. Deion Jackson, though, 74% snap share, 71% route share. Those are like early season Abram Smith numbers. I think he's like fully supplanted Smith as the bell cow the team wants. And I mean, it makes sense. Like I pointed out last week or the week prior, these running backs are, sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. I'm just going to ask you, what are your thoughts on Deion Jackson?
I was going to try to fill in, but I'd been looking up stats, so I wasn't really listening. I was waiting for the question. Yeah, I think Deion Jackson is playable on a slate where I don't love any of the running backs. It's not the best matchup with Arlington. They haven't been like that great against the run. They've allowed 107 rush yards per game over the past 3. So they've been actually pretty middling against the run in recent weeks. But I think just in general, they have a fairly strong defense. And this is a team that is, I think, going to be passing a lot more in this game. So I'm not like super enthusiastic about Deion Jackson like I was last week, especially now that he's 7,800 and getting 12% ownership. But I think I'll likely get to some shares, especially because I am going to be doing, when I do the double stacks with bringbacks, I'm going to include running backs as an option. So I imagine I'll get pretty close to that 12% the field is at. I'm not going to make the same mistake I made last week of including Abram Smith in some of my lineups. That did not go well for me at all. But yeah, I think I'll get to a bit of Deion Jackson, probably around 10 to 15%, somewhere in that range. How about you?
Yeah, I think I'll be pretty similar. My main thing with Deion Jackson is I'm excited to play him like within game stacks attached to Te'amu. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to get to much like Deion Jackson plus the defender's defense because, again, I really anticipate, or I'm really going to bet on this game being a shootout here. So probably won't have much of him as like a one-off or paired with the defense. But in Te'amu lineups, in Perez lineups, I do think that will probably be where I get most of my Deion Jackson exposure. Neil, I think that'll just about do it. Are there any late swap options that you really love in this game? I think we sort of already talked about it a little bit. Like a Braylon Sanders could go maybe a tad undervalued. He's still projecting for about 20% ownership. Really, though, like Jaden Mickens, Isaiah Winstead, Burnett, Payton would probably be my favorites. Maybe even a little bit of Tony Jones as a late swap option, especially like if you have a flex. Leaving 2K on the table at the running back position feels a little gross, but if you were going to play like a 4 or 5K wide receiver instead, pivoting to Tony Jones, I think makes sense to me. What do you think about late swaps here?
Yeah, I think Tony Jones and JP Payton and Deontay Burnett, like those 3 are all going pretty low owned for us. So I'd say those 3 are the ones that stand out to me. You could mix in like a, I don't know, did I say Jaden Mickens? I think he would be, kind of, if you need somebody at 3,800 or whatever he is, he'd be a fine late swap option. Yeah, I think like all of the expensive plays we have for double digit ownership already. So not like incredible, but yeah, I think we've got, some solid options there.
Yep. Yeah, I am right there with you guys. As always, really appreciate everyone tuning into this show, dealing with me completely losing my train of thought when I try to talk about Deion Jackson. No idea what happened there, but it's week 8. Sometimes you make some mistakes even late in the season. That felt like more of a week 1, week 2 kind of error. But Neil, we will persevere from here. But yeah, guys, thanks so much. I'll be sure to update everything in Discord, keep everyone updated there. Really appreciate you all tuning in, and we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.